Hello and welcome to another session of Life Skills with Mrs. T. I'm Mrs. T and this session I'm going to go through how to read a pattern. Sometimes when you go to a fabric shop, for example, you look through the catalogue, you find a pattern you want and you think, oh yes, I could make something that would look really good. But when you get the pattern home and you go through the instructions, sometimes the symbols, the what does it mean can be a tad confusing. So in this session, I'll hopefully give you an idea of how to read a pattern so that when you're next going to buy one, it'll hopefully give you a bit of a better idea so that you know where to start and how to proceed. So I've got a couple of patterns here. One is from New Look and one that you would tend to kind of buy in a fabric shop. And then I've got one that I actually got free with a magazine. Some magazines do come with the more complex patterns, it's just dependent on what magazine that you buy. So I'm just going to go through them. The reason why I've picked these two patterns is that the one from the magazine is slightly simpler to read than the complex one, so I thought I'd give a good idea of both of them. So if we start with this one, so if you look at the back, you've got what it includes, what you will need, some fabric suggestions. So that's really good to look at what sort of fabric suggestions, because the pattern is obviously designed for different types of fabrics. So unless you're like me who tends to pick fabrics and then go, oh, I think this will work for this pattern, I'll hope for the best, it is actually a really good idea to follow the fabric suggestions because obviously the patterns have been designed accordingly. And then obviously, like it says here, as you can see there, it'll go through how much fabric that you actually need for, in this case, a top and a dress. And something called interfacing, which helps provide strength to things like collars. So you can usually get that at your fabric shop. And then here you've got a size chart. So that's where it's really important to measure yourself properly, because what you might be in the clothes shop might not be what you find yourself on the pattern. So that's where it's really important to measure yourself so that you can determine on the pattern what you are. So for example, I'm a couple of sizes bigger when it comes to a sewing pattern than I am if I go to a clothes shop. But don't let that put you off. It's just the way that they've been designed, and as we know, clothes shops aren't always the best at determining what your actual body shape is. So if we look at the more complex one, it's got a lot more detail and it often comes in a different language as well. So you'll find here again you've got like different pictures, so it'll look at A, B, C, D, and that's just different variations of the pattern. So that'll just look at what different dresses that you can make on this pattern, for example. So if I flip over, it corresponds to A, B, C, D. So that gives you an idea of this is what it looks like, and then that's obviously looking at the back of the pattern there. You've got an order code, what sizes it comes in. Again, you've got suggested fabrics and requirements. So there it's saying that you're actually going to need a zip with this one. And then for each, so it's got here A, B, C, D. It's telling you how much fabric is required for each different change in design. So when it comes to the English, it is in yards, but if you work in meters, then move across to the French side because it will actually say. So you will find that fabric comes in different widths. You've got 115 centimeter width and 150 centimeter width. So if you see here, there are the two different ones, and according to the width of the fabric will require how many meters that you require, and it's the same here with yardage as well. So I'll start off with the pattern pieces from the sewing magazine. What I like about the ones from this particular sewing magazine is that it's actually really laid out really well and simple, and it's great for the beginner to sort of understand what a pattern looks like. You'll find on patterns that they show you how to put the pattern pieces on fabric. So if you can see here, it's like cutting layout. So depending on the width of the fabric will depend on how you place your pattern pieces. So the selvages in this case, where it says selvages, is the non-frayable side of the fabric. And that's what the reason why we have to do this is that we're following the grain line. So if you can see there's a line here that says A line. If I compare it to, if you see the big piece here, it says B here, so and then it's got the grain line which goes down. And we want to follow the grain line which is parallel to the selvages when we cut cut our pattern pieces from the fabric. And this is particularly important if you're using patterns, for example, that we follow that line. So this also goes through some stitching terms and kind of gives you ideas of how to cut out. So here it says cut out, front bodice A, cut 1 on fold. And that means basically the fabric is folded in 2 and you cut it out, and that means you end up with 2 pieces of fabric. And then also here it's very good and it shows you what the different pattern markings are. So I'll just give you an idea on the pattern piece itself. So you would need to cut this out. So you've obviously measured yourself by this point, and then you would decide, okay, this is what size I am on the pattern, so this is what I'm going to cut out. So say you were a size 14, for example. If you can see here, it's a dotted line, so it says size 14 dotted line, and you'd basically cut all the way around the pattern. Obviously if you're trying to be a bit thrifty and you kind of think, oh, I'd like to save the pattern for perhaps a bigger size, a smaller size, you can just fold this over like so. I find that quite tricky, so it's up to you really, whatever you feel that you'd like to do. So you've got notches here, and notches are just little snip snips, so you just basically do a little snip snip into the fabric, and that helps you to match up pattern pieces when you're bringing them together. So let's see what else is on here that I can show you. So this is where it says, if you see here, this is a bit different to the grain line in that it's saying fold line, and again that means that you match this line here where it says fold line against the fold of the fabric when you are laying your pattern pieces on the fabric. You've also got here some little circles, and what you could do there is a small, a long tack. So you would just get a needle and a thread, pull that through, and leave that tacking stitch, like just basically a long piece of thread through the fabric as a way of marking, because it will be part of a, you know, it'll help you match up to another pattern piece. Or you could use tailor's chalk, for example, or a tracing wheel and carbon paper is another way that you can also mark things on the fabric. So if we compare this to the pattern that you'll see in the shop, let's get this out. As you can see, it's a little bit more complicated, but again the same principles would apply. You would look at your pattern. So say I wanted to do dress A, I would go down this list and I know, okay, I need pieces 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then that would be it. So I know out of all these pattern pieces I need to cut out 1 to 10. Again, same principles, measuring yourself and then cutting out. As you can see here, it would be following the corresponding lines to cut out. And again, it also would show you kind of how you would fold your fabric and how you would place your pieces on that. So you've got, again, it's very similar on here. You've still got your notches here. So some other points to consider. Sometimes you might get alteration lines on, especially tops. It's not on this one because this one comes with a midriff back, so kind of a waistband. But you'll see an alteration line, and that's where you can shorten or lengthen that particular bit. So for example, for me, I find that my waist tends to sit about an inch and a half lower than most commercial patterns. So I usually find I have to add a bit of length onto, especially when I'm looking at bodice, or I have to kind of, when it says where the alter line is, I just need to open it up and add that extra length so that it sits on my waistline. So that's also another thing to think about. Where is your waistline, and you know, how does it fit? So that's why it is recommended that you do a practice run. So say you've not used a pattern before, so you might not have an idea of how a commercial pattern sits on your body. It's always worth using a fabric, very cheap fabric. It could just be like a pair of curtains from the charity shop, for example. Do a mock-up, see how it fits on your body, and you can have a play around before you kind of use proper fabric. And obviously you spent a bit of money on proper fabric, so you want to make sure that you get it right. Some other tips when reading a pattern. So again, this pattern does give you some tips, which is great. So here it says sewing directions, fabric key, right side, wrong side, lining and interfacing. So if I turn it over, you'll see here there's different colours. So if we look, it'll say the light grey is right side. So that would be right side. So the right side of the fabric tends to be, in a pattern for example, it would be the side with the pattern, and then the plain side would be wrong side. And then there you've got like the interfacing and then the lining. So it just helps you to understand which way round the fabric has to be when you're sewing it. Sometimes though, when you do read a pattern, it can all feel a bit gobbledygook, like you're reading some Greek, especially if you don't understand Greek. Don't worry, it's quite normal. I think that's where doing a mock-up is really important. Have a practice. I think the more you use patterns, the easier they do get to read. Though I think different companies write things different ways, so it is just kind of finding out what suits you. But if you get stuck, YouTube is a really good place to go. Have a look on YouTube, type in some suggestions, see what comes up. Or you could always ask me. I'm always happy for you to leave a question on my Facebook page, and when I'm able I will reply and help you out, because I just really want people to learn to sew. That's why I'm here, and so if I can help you, that is great. So take care, and I will catch you on the next instalment of Life Skills with Mrs. T.